Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Our guest this evening is Dinali Fernando. Dinali has an honors degree in English from the University of Kelaniya and an MA in ELT from the University of Reading. She is interested in all aspects of Sri Lankan English, but especially in its significance in English language teaching. At university, she teaches topics in applied linguistics, including world Englishes on undergraduate and postgraduate courses. She is also a trainer who works with teachers of English in several parts of the country. When she is free, she loves to watch cooking programs on YouTube that she never tries out, and to read contemporary fiction in both Sinhala and English. I'm sure you will have questions and comments, so please include those in the chat and we will take them up as we go along. Dinali, welcome to this session and thank you for agreeing to make the time because I know you're really stretched with your PhD work.
Thank you, Dinali. Thank you very much for inviting me to this interesting conversation. But I hope it will be an interesting conversation. It's so good to see you and to be here.
Okay, we'll have to do something about your cooking programs, but not today. We'll do those offline. So I'm going to go right into it with Sri Lankan English. What do we mean when we say Sri Lankan English?
Okay, quite simply, I would say Sri Lankan English is the variety of English that we speak in Sri Lanka. As we know, English is a global language. It doesn't really belong to one country anymore. And we identify this variation in the way we speak English differently in different parts of the world by giving it, what is called nation-based terminology. So we speak Sri Lankan English, Indians would speak Indian English, etc. At the same time, the term, when we say Sri Lankan English, I have to caution that it's not an unproblematic label, but we'll leave the problems for later on. We'll talk about those later.
Okay. All right. But how do you think it evolved? I mean, in your studies, have you seen how this has evolved, how it has come to be called Sri Lankan English?
Okay. Generally, of course, we know English came to us because of the colonization. We were part of the British Empire during the colonial period, and that's how we got English, and that's how English spread as this very powerful, prestigious language in the country, spoken by a tiny number, but still the very powerful minority spoke it. But its evolution obviously reflects that of how English evolved in India, in certain Anglophone African countries, etc. So you could see, like in the research, we first talked about English in Sri Lanka, and now where English is spoken in Sri Lanka, but now we prefer to say Sri Lankan English as a variety. So the evolution started in the late 18th century. But actually, what I'm more interested in is how quickly it's evolving now with globalization and in this postmodern world that we live in the 21st century.
Okay. So is what we refer to as Sri Lankan English what is spoken just by Colombo-centric people, or is it more island-wide?
I think originally our idea of English was what Colombo people spoke, because the elite was associated with Colombo, the colonial elite, and then after that the Papa Sahibs, etc. But now I think in 2021, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that English is spoken everywhere. This is because it's part of our education. It has been part of our education for about 80 years, for better or for worse. And if I take a personal example from my profession, from my teaching context, I work at the Department of English at Kelaniya University. And 30 years ago or 40 years ago, when I was a student, 30 years ago, the English department was made up of students from Colombo. We were mostly from Colombo or the suburbs. We grew up in bilingual or English-only homes, etc. And then we were privileged enough to do literature, which was available to only a few students. And then we ended up in campus as this elite clique, almost. But now, if you look at the demographics of the English department, our students come from everywhere. My students come from Kurunegala, from Matara, from Kuliyapitiya, from Kaluthara, uh, it has become very widespread English. It's not to say there are areas that is English is a foreign language. There are, but with urbanization, our ideas of what the urban centers are has changed. It's not only Colombo, Kandy, Jaffna, Galle, and Margaret anymore. It's pretty much
Oh, so
everywhere.
that's wonderful. That's wonderful to know that, English faculties are attracting all these students. I mean, that's a very positive thing,
Yeah, I think so too.
because
Yeah.
to study at university level is a challenge. It's not like doing sort of, Okay, so how does Sri Lankan English differ from English English?
Okay, if by English you mean like standard British English, usually
Yes.
traditionally we identify these differences in terms of language features, linguistic features, like accents and pronunciation, and then the words we use, the vocabulary, and also grammar structures. What we generally go by is what is codified, what is written about and researched about, and the words and features that are in dictionaries and research papers, etc. But of course, this is a very live, living thing. It's very hard to pin down sometimes because the way we speak English in Sri Lanka is also evolving and changing. It can evolve. It can be very different among different speakers. So there is not one Sri Lankan English, I should also say. There are many Sri Lankan Englishes.
Okay. Um, so how do Sri Lankans use English? I think you wanted to say something when we were having a pre-event discussion. We were talking a bit about grammar because I think Sinhala grammar is structured differently. Maybe Tamil grammar is structured differently. So how do we deal with grammar, and how is English taught in areas outside of this urban population?
Right. I'll take that as two questions. First one is, well, grammatical features have been very well described by Professor Mani Gunasekara in her seminal book, The Post-Colonial Identity of Sri Lankan English. And then Michael Mailer's dictionary, the introduction covers a lot of the grammar. And there have been studies of grammar acceptability, etc., of Sri Lankan English. So it's features like the way we overuse the past present continuous tense, like things like saying, I'm living in Mathur, I'm working in Kandy, whereas standard British English grammar rules would say you have to use the simple present tense. Say, I live in Mathur and I work in Kandy. But this is a feature possibly going back to our local languages, our own languages, because you see it in India and you see it like in South Asia. Another feature is like the way we drop articles, like it's quite common to say to drop the ers and the thers when we speak. And also like the way we use prepositions, so phrasal verbs that include prepositions. We sometimes add prepositions, we delete prepositions, which should be there according to British English rules, like cope up with, bear up the pain, things like that. So there's a lot of features, and they're most visible, they're most obvious in informal speech, informal speaking styles. When we write, more formally we write, the more we try to, we are taught to avoid them usually. But it's interesting that it is entering the formal written genre as well. For example, the word research, uh, uh, English grammar rules will tell you it doesn't have an article, but even in academia we use the word research with an article. So it's quite common to hear people saying, "I did a research on COVID-19's impact. I did a research with my friend." And I think it's wrong, but I have to question myself if, very powerful academics in the STEM subjects who teach in English are using this so often. What's my place to say that it's wrong? So that is related English, if you like.
So it's evolving. I mean, I'm digressing a bit, but you did touch on India, so I'd like to just talk about, are there a lot of similarities between the way Indian English and Sri Lankan English? Do you see the same sort
I
of pattern?
I think so, yes. I think there's not, I don't really know much because I haven't really researched Indian English, but this grammatical feature, like, the present continuous, our love for the present continuous is very much an Indian feature as well. And the way we say no at the end of sentences, I don't think the Indians say no the way we say You're going no, you're coming no. Yeah, it's
But
bad.
that's in other languages, right? I mean, like in Sinhalese we say neither, and in French they say n'est pas. So it's,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. Some people I think say, isn't it so? And it has become in it in some
In
areas
it,
of.
isn't it? Yes, interestingly, in it, I was told that it's an Indian feature, but because of the British Indian community, it has become a part of English in informal context in certain parts of the UK. So these are, I mean, they flow both ways sometimes. And this is what people like Suresh Kanagaraja talks about, who's one of the people I really look up to in applied linguistics, who says that, call centers who who are global, you think you're calling the call center in the UK, and then if the phone is picked up by someone in Ahmedabad, and then you are confronted with this different accent, and you can't say, that's a different variety of English. I don't understand it. That's not acceptable because you need to get something done. You might need to get your TV repaired. You need to get your vacuum cleaner replaced. So you are engaging with these different varieties online a lot.
So that probably is a great opportunity now for cross-pollinization and sort of, you never know. In another 5-10 years, it might have completely sort of coalesced into some other something that we won't recognize. But
I think we will recognize it. Yeah. It'll change its form.
I want you to talk a little bit about world Englishes. I don't think a lot of people in our audiences is really familiar even with that term.
Okay,
So
it's
if you
an
talk a
area
bit.
yeah, it's an area of study in linguistics and applied linguistics in particular. World Englishes is this, it's a area of research as well. I would say it's like one of these approaches or terms that we have used to make sense of this phenomenon of English in the world, how it has spread, how it has evolved, how it has changed nature. It's very multiple, there are many, many faces to English everywhere. We use it in different ways, not just in different countries, in different contexts. World Englishes is just one of those paradigms. There are others World Englishes is strongly associated with Braj Kachru, who's a Kashmiri American academic who first coined the term, and it resonates a lot with us in Sri Lanka because he talked about how countries like India and Sri Lanka in the South Asian region, as well as former colonies of the UK, of England in African countries, we have a different relationship with English. It is at once our own language as well as for a second or a foreign language. We have appropriated it as one of our languages. We know that English has a de facto official status in this country. Constitutionally, it's not given an official status. It's only called a linked language. But we know that English is pretty strong, pretty powerful, whether you're talking about education, whether you're talking about the corporate sector. The Supreme Court functions in English. So,
And the Court of Appeal,
yeah,
yes.
exactly, the Court of Appeal. So, World Englishes is just one of these ways to make sense of this phenomenon of English. It's also research, it's a field of research.
Okay. So it's pretty much English everywhere that sort of is studied and looked at, or do you specialize? Do you then specialize within that whole world Englishes? Because I'm sure this is a new area of study. I'm asking you because there might be students out there, and I want them to know that there is, those days I think an English degree was quite sort of people had different notions. So it's nice to talk a bit about other areas of study in English.
Okay,
So that
there are multiple areas that you can go into in terms of research. Traditionally, we describe the linguistic features. So, there's a journal called World Englishes that you can read. There are about 3 journals, academic journals, that publish research on this English in the world. First, there's a lot of work on, the vocabulary, the syntax, the grammar, the pronunciation of these different varieties, and they look at each variety as very different and unique, and thereby it gives us a new identity. We are speakers of Sri Lankan English, that kind of thing. But now, of course, there's a lot more work done going beyond linguistic descriptions, looking at identity, looking at ideologies behind speaking English and learning English. looking at these different world Englishes in the classroom. That's a huge area with many multiple areas within it. So if you're really keen, I'm telling this to my former students who might be tuned in. I know they are. If you're interested in researching world Englishes, I think the best thing to do is to look at some of the content pages of the journal, and it will see, like, sky's the limit. There are such interesting things. Online Englishes, how Sri Lankan English or any Englishes function online, and some people say it's like now across countries, online is another platform. So there's another variety that is being, that is evolving online when we talk to each other on, Facebook, etc.
I know LOL used to be lots of love, but now it has become laugh out loud, and there's utter
Yes.
confusion. If you say
And my
hello to
parents tell me that laugh out loud has been Sri Lankanized to lole lol, which can be in English or in singular.
oh dear.
Yeah, so it's evolving. It's evolving very rapidly online, and I'm always very excited to see. I'm a Facebook addict. I keep in touch with everybody, especially during the pandemic, online on Facebook. So I'm very excited when I see these usages.
Okay, and we also wanted to say, so that really segues beautifully, if there's such a word as segues, into the social media question that we were wanting to talk about. The impact of social media on the use of English and world Englishes.
Okay, so I think I'm not really very well read on this, but I think scholars are now have looked at online Englishes as this phenomenon, and it's a very interesting platform, as you know, because it kind of collapses all the distances. It brings together people from very different language backgrounds, multilingual people onto this platform and interacting in a very close and intimate kind of, sometimes extremely, intense kind of way. And this phenomenon is being investigated. And we can see it's really interesting for me, as someone who's interested in Sri Lankan English, to see how Sri Lankan English is hitting the globe. You can't stop being Sri Lankan when you speak English. So you can see it on YouTube comments, you can see it on, public platforms, on Facebook, it's everywhere. So it's these, comments on political articles where people fight with each other, call each other names. You can see the Sri Lankanness in those interactions as well.
Okay, so and I think the whole social media thing also has helped a lot of people use English.
I think
The whole sort of writing and maybe sort of articulating themselves in English. I think it has been a sort of a very good, in a way, it has been very good, I think, globally for all of us. I don't know whether it's the problem with Be Live, but please, if you have questions, please put them in the public chat, because Dinali will pick them up. I will pose them to Dinali, but I'm going to move on to my next section, which is Sri Lankan English pronunciation, which is, I think, a bête noire for a lot of people. So, and it's pretty sensitive. I remember growing up also, I didn't go for elocution classes, but I'm still very conscious of the way I speak. Do you want to say something about accent and pronunciation? Do you want to touch on that? Is there something, is there such a thing as, some people say you speak with an accent. In Sri Lanka, you hear this. So is there such a thing as a Sri Lankan accent, or I don't know. What has been your experience?
Well, personally and professionally, I think accents are, to begin with, accents are a huge can of worms. I think in any language, accents are, the way we speak, our pronunciation and accents are the one that evokes most, prejudice and bias and strongest reactions. And this has been written about. So it's a very sticky thing, but it's as you said, it's a very sensitive topic sometimes, but it's also a topic we should talk about, I think, because we can slide it under the carpet, like certain approaches in the past to language teaching said, it doesn't matter how you say it, as long as you can say it and other person understand. It's not so simple, I would say. it's because accents, the way we speak, signals our ethnicity, signals our class, signals our education, and rightly or wrongly, there may be misconceptions, but these misconceptions are very powerful. So they are connected with attitudes and ideologies, which are very powerful. Uh, at the same time, if you talk about a Sri Lankan accent, I think Professor Manik was very, Manik Gunasekara in her book was very bold to identify two different, two polarized accents. As what's acceptable as the educated Sri Lankan accent, which she refers to as the standard Sri Lankan English accent, and what people who speak with that, with the education, the educated accent, will look down on and laugh, which she calls a non-standard Sri Lankan English accent. So we can argue with what she says, with the comments, with the features she provides, as a non-standard accent and a standard accent. But the more I talk to teachers, the more I feel it's not something that we can ignore. But of course, at the same time, it's a language, it's a variety, and there's a whole variety of what is wrong. There's a whole range of what is acceptable. There's a whole range of what we can, adopt as or adapt as a Sri Lankan accent. At the same, and also I think accents are hard to train. In America, you get this horrendous things called accent reduction courses, where if you want to migrate to America, there are courses you can follow, especially if you're one of the stigmatized communities like the Hispanics, where you can go and learn to reduce your Spanish accent. Now, those are considered, violations of linguistic human rights. But at the same time, the flip side is that you will be judged. The job you get offered might be rejected because you don't sound educated, you don't sound like you're a fluent speaker. So it's a tough thing. What I think is, like, in the classroom, I think I think maybe I have trained myself not to be prejudiced about the way students speak and different accents and accents that fit into the non-standard category and the standard category. But outside, it is, people will be judged. Another aspect of accents is, like you said, she's speaking with an accent, and that is something I have grown up with. I think my parents would have been really harsh on me if I suddenly acquired a British accent, by watching some play or, listening to a recording. And we didn't have TV when I was growing up. But, and that's worse than, mispronouncing the pot is on the stove and say pot is on the stove, which is now completely acceptable in most academic contexts. If I'm talking about the university educational context, that kind of is usages or confusion. I mean, that is now, it has migrated from being non-acceptable to completely acceptable, if you ask me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this accent, you're speaking with an accent. I remember doing theater and working with an American lady, and then everybody laughed at me, saying, "Why are you trying to talk like her?" I hadn't realized that by hearing her, talking to her, rehearsing with her every day, I had picked up some inflections, and so I got laughed at. So yeah, so you get all sorts.
Actually, that's very interesting because we think of accents as static things. They are very dynamic. I mean, it's very natural for us to start imitating without knowing someone we are hearing. I think there's a technical term for it in phonology, which I can't remember right now. But it's natural. Like, okay, now we are talking in Sri Lankan English, so my accent is quite Sri Lankan. I'm not easing out, the intonation. I'm not smoothing out my intonation. But if you were a standard British English speaker, I think I might have spoken a little bit like this because it might not be very clear to the person who's interviewing me. So all my intonation and all has gone there. But with you, and I know our audience is mostly Sri Lankan and hopefully my friends, and they can understand me perfectly, and this is how I normally speak. So it's natural.
Correct. Okay, so how important then is it to teach pronunciation? Because you were talking about the pot and the stove. So how important is it to try and sort of do something about that, or do you not do anything about that anymore? You just go with it.
Very good question, and a very tough question for me, because I don't work with children who are beginning to learn to speak. I don't work even with adults. I don't work with beginner level learners.
Oh,
I
yeah.
am privileged, and it's a luxurious state I am in. I get very good learners, speakers of English who come into university and learn. But the little bit of experience I've had is you don't focus on the accent at the beginning. You have to let them speak, and that's the problem in our country. We don't get children speaking enough. But I think at the same time, if now, okay, now let me be sensible about this and say, okay, if it's an adult learner who's learning English for the first time, I think as learners, we need to also, as teachers, we have to tell our students, particularly if they're adults, that these are the repercussions of, not not being able to pronounce this way. You might get misunderstood. You might get socially judged if you speak like this. But at the same time, some of these differences, these so-called mistakes, are perfectly okay because it always depends. I mean, we talk in a context. No, there's always a particular listener or a group of listeners in a context where sometimes these errors are fine, sometimes they might not be fine. So it has to be contextualized, and all the ideologies about language learning also have to enter the teaching, I think. And we sometimes think our students don't have the intelligence to handle this ambiguity, which is a grave misunderstanding, a misconception, I think. Because whenever I tell students, okay, some people say it like this, some people say it like that, uh, but this might be, construed as this if you say it like that. They're fine with it. I mean that's background knowledge that students appreciate.
Okay. Mm, okay. So what do we do about? Okay. So actually, I don't need to ask you that because we were talking about absolutely correct pronunciation, and you've covered that because
Okay.
one thing is in the interest of good communication. But I want to ask you this: why do you think many people who know English won't speak it?
Tough
I know,
question.
I know
That's great.
that is such a tragedy because a lot of people know English, but they won't speak it. And I put you in a spot here, but in your experience, when you have been working with teachers and students from all over, I'm sure initially it must be tough. They must be coming in with very good knowledge, but they just won't speak in the classroom. I mean, I have seen it from my own academic career, where people will not speak, especially in a crowd. They will not speak.
Yeah, lots of things going on at the same time, I think, Dinali. One is our education that, our formal English language education we get at school, which privileges writing and reading over speaking. So students have just not got the opportunity to practice in a classroom in a safe space and get over some of the initial fears. I'm talking particularly about students who come into university who know, and also this idea that knowing English is to understand grammar, to learn about grammar, and have be a passive expert in English grammar and a passive expert in vocabulary, if you like. So it's always interesting when you ask a student who you don't think is fluent in English, what's the English term for something very technical and difficult, and they know the word immediately. So, like you said, they know English, but they can't speak it. And another thing is, in addition to the lack of the educational focus on speaking, and there's also the lack of opportunity to speak. So English learning mostly takes place outside the classroom. It's what you do with it's what you put into
Yeah.
practice outside. But then, if you are in an area where nobody speaks English and nobody cares about learning to speak English, you're not going to get the opportunity. And this in Colombo, in congested urban spaces, can be divided just by a wall. You might live next to
Yeah.
two very different housing estates might be side by side, where one posh gated community speaks only in English. Right next to it, there's a low income settlement that doesn't speak any English and does not, there are people who would love to learn English but don't have the opportunity to. Another thing, so there's also the fear and the anxiety of being judged, being laughed at. We talk a lot about that in general. And I think there's a lot of resistance to that. I love the younger generation who's aware of this kind of fear, and they've experienced this fear, and they don't, I think uh, 10, 50, or even 50 years ago, it was much worse. People laughed a lot
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another thing is there's resistance. This is something we
Sorry.
don't really, there is a resistance. There is, a lot of teachers have told me, particularly boys in schools, like at teenage years, when they
Mm.
reach their teenage classes, when they're like 14, 15, they don't want to be seen as English speakers. They like to be seen as non-English speakers. So that kind of thing is not something that we do know enough about, and there's something that can be researched actually. Like I have this little boy I live in that kind of setup where my road, all middle class people spoke English, studied in English. Right next to it, we have this big community where people are, don't speak any English. And I heard the story of this little boy who is in grade one and whose sister did well, and she got a pass. That's a huge achievement. She got an S for her O levels, but which meant she could be a teacher. She could be trained to be a preschool assistant. And she was telling him to do his English homework, and he had shouted at her in Sinhala, had said, "Mat English nado, mata se api Sinhala." In other words, I don't need English, I'm Sinhalese. So
Yeah.
he is only 6 years old, right? But I can see that in teenage boys that there is a resistance.
Okay. But I think when they go out into the work environment, then I think they sort of realize that you need it to function, especially
Yeah,
in a corporate environment.
yeah.
Um,
There's an
and
interesting study by a sociologist, Dinesh Karnaratna at the University of Colombo, who has
okay.
said, who has found, I mean, her analysis is that English is necessary maybe not to get a job. You can get a job without English. If you look at the public sector, I mean, most public servants don't speak English. But in order to get ahead, to get good promotions, and to go up that little level that will,
Hmm.
improve your quality of life, you need English.
Interesting. That's
Yeah,
very interesting.
yeah, it's quite nuanced actually.
How do we help these people? I mean, how do you address these young boys who are resistant to speaking English?
I don't teach young boys, so it's very hard for me to say.
I know, but could
But
somebody do a research,
in
maybe a
general,
research?
I think it has to
So,
be a concerted effort, like from parents at home valuing education along with English, and encouraging some kind of English. Even in this community I'm talking about, there are kids who are much more comfortable in English because their fathers and mothers know some English, and they think it's good to speak in English with their children occasionally. And one father told me from the same community, මම මගේ පුතාට ඉංග්‍රීසියෙන් කතා කරනවා අනික් අය hina වෙනවා ඇති. In other words, I speak to my son sometimes in English. Others, my neighbors, might be laughing at me, but I'm going to do it anyway for his own good. You know?
wow.
Yeah.
Oh, so I'm going to take you to Sri Lankan English literature next.
Okay.
What has been the impact of Sri Lankan writing in English on English in Sri Lanka?
Oh, I think any literature doesn't really impact on the use of the language. Literature is rarefied, no, but
No.
but I think we're still, I think those who write in English come from the English speaking classes. This class is growing. Okay, I'm not saying it's that old colonial class. It's a huge class now, and its contours have changed a lot geographically, and also we must not forget ethnicity when we talk about Sri Lankan English. But I think what's interesting is how there is more and more there is Sri Lankan English in literature, and I think in a way it has well writing at the I think we should clarify at the beginning. Writing is a creative thing, but it's also a deliberate thing. So the use of Sri Lankan English in creative writing is sometimes unconscious. Okay, we're using it, not realizing it, and at the other times it's deliberately done. It's very creatively done, and we manipulate Sri Lankan English, like Michael Ondaatje. He does it beautifully. I mean, he refers to all sorts of Sri Lankan things which we don't really use in in
Yeah.
Sri Lanka, but he obviously has enough Sri Lankan English in him to realize that this is a literary resource I have, a linguistic resource I have. Like, for instance, this poem I think Running in the Family is full of them. But this poem in The Cinnamon Peeler, that term itself is very Sri Lankan, no? Because, and I also, to be a bit mean about it, you can see also you use varieties of English like Sri Lankan and Indian English to exoticize a little bit, okay? Because to a Canadian picking up this book, it will be, a profession. But we, in Sri Lanka, Cinnamon Peeler, it's also a caste, so it has all these. So obviously, you can play with the meanings. But coming back to his poems, I mean, there's a lovely poem called Sweet Like a Crow, which he has written to his niece about how horrible her voice sounds. So along with,
I know,
and he compared, it's a series of similes, no? Or metaphors, I think. He says, your voice is a Royal Tomian match. Your voice is a frog singing in Carnegie Hall. And it's like wattaka being fried, with a pumpkin, and then you go, oh, wow, wattaka, in a Canadian writer,
But that's very unkind. But I think for me, one of the champions of this was Carl Muller, I think. Yes.
Totally,
Really like Arundhati Roy woke me up to sort of Indian English. Because I found it in her writing. But then Carl Muller was such a revelation, like it was amazing that you read something and you think, my gosh, I wrote it. And I think for a while I spoke like that because it was so attractive, it felt like home. So
I totally agree with you about Karmal. I love his language. I love the trilogy, I must say. And it's also very it's not just grammar and syntax. It's also about the pronunciation, about the accent. Like when I was thinking of what to say, I found this lovely line in Karmal. I mean, lots of lines. For example, there is this line when the mother is talking about breakfast, and she says. If you just see it in that Penguin edition, it's just you just see the syntax. Told the hopper boy to come by 7, she says. But her saying it, so you can hear an arch saying, told the hopper boy to come at 7.
yeah, exactly.
It's so real the way he writes, colloquial, And this is first language speakers. Remember, the community spoke English as their first language.
Exactly. And he made it sound like home, and so unabashedly, and I thought very brave at that time.
Superb,
it was excellent. And has there been much use of? Okay, so we've talked about Carl Muller, and I want you to talk about because we've been talking about Sri Lankan English and all these writers. I want you to talk about the dictionary, please.
Okay, so the dictionary was published in 2007, and Michael Mailer, he's my friend as well, he was compiling this over, I think, about 15 years at least. He was collecting words, as he says, first on the back of an envelope. And then he had this significant number of words. And then Vivimari Vanderpoorten, my friend from the Open University, and I kind of started helping him with it and also contributing words, etc. And then he put it together and published it in 2007. So this is like the first comprehensive, I would say it's the first comprehensive description of Sri Lankan English lexis, or vocabulary. And it's written in a dictionary form. I know how much he worked on it. And he's right now, I don't think he'll mind putting a plug on his behalf. He's working on the updated edition as well. Okay, so it was a very much a learning experience for me because it made us confront a lot of the nitty-gritty of what Sri Lankan English is. In terms of what people think of Sri Lankan English. Sometimes, like if you go back to your very first question, what is Sri Lankan English? For some people, it's not a variety of English. That is the academic definition, which is not a meaning that is shared by everybody. So for some people, in later Sri Lankan English means all these mistakes that we make when we write, when we speak, on notice boards. Spelling mistakes on notice boards, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. And also, I wanted you to talk a bit about the how because we are very blessed. We are a multi-ethnic country, and how the different ethnicities have contributed into this language that we call Sri Lankan English.
Yes, I think that's a very, very interesting and exciting and area that we need to talk about. So one thing, as I said, some of the contentious things that we encountered when we were compiling the Sri Lankan English dictionary is that most of it is based on how Sinhala speakers spoke English, first language Sinhala speakers, like myself, my first language is Sinhala. And Michael speaks Sinhala, Michael has learned Sinhala. And then more and more we were confronted by the fact that this is the dominant lexicon. In other words, it's Sinhala that has contributed a lot to Sri Lankan English, but it's not very fair to package it like that, because on the one hand, in any country, the dominant language informs the variety of English, like Hindi in North India, Tamil in South India, etc. But at the same time, because the relationship is so contentious. I mean, we have a history of brutal killing of each other, and tragedies associated with our lack of understanding of the minority communities in this country. We had to, we really tried hard to find words, and we weren't very successful. But now, after the dictionary was published, this discourse started. For example, 2007 the dictionary came, 2009 the war ended, and access to Jaffna and for us particularly access to the academics in the Jaffna University was possible. And my friends at the Jaffna University, starting with Dr. Sivapalan, Amitajli Sivapalan, who passed away, and then Professor Sarolabhava Iyer, they have written about how there is a Jaffna English. So it's a part of Sri Lankan English, but with a unique Jaffna identity, where the language, the words are from, Jaffna Hindu culture. The war has been a huge contributor of vocabulary. There's a whole lot of, Sri Lankan English and Tamil words referring to, warfare and guns and all the experiences. So that is something that I'm very interested in. And on the other hand, the Muslim influence on Sri Lankan English has not been documented. And that's another failing, because continuing mistrust between, our communities, which is a modern, tragedy of these days, where I think we made a decision not to include Islamic words in the dictionary because purely because they're not Sri Lankan, they're global words. But if on the other hand, we need to acknowledge that our Sri Lankan Muslims use, it's very much a part of the lexicon of the Sri Lankan Muslim, and we can't really, it's part of it. Yeah. So this idea of uniqueness has been a bit of a myth, and this has been written about by academics, where you can't say, okay, it has to be only spoken in Sri Lanka, or it has to be only used in Sri Lanka for it to be Sri Lankan English. Okay, identity is not like that actually. So that's
it's much more. It's wonderful that it's much more fluid and encompassed rather than so limiting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have about 15 minutes left. I'm going to go into the public chat because we've got those questions. I'm going to abandon vanity and wear my glasses. And oh my goodness, we have loads of questions. So someone wants to know, why is English a really common language? There are many more languages in the world, right? And very Sri Lankan with a question mark.
English is a common language, I think. Well, what the experts say, English is a world language, and English is like the current world language. But like in the 19th century, French was like the diplomatic language of Russia and all. And we know Spanish is also a world language. Arabic can be considered a world language because it's spoken right across Arabic countries. One thing that the experts say is English has this tenacity to stay and become more and more of a world language because English is more accepting of change. English borrows from all the languages. English is not a pure language. From thousands of years ago, English is made up of many different languages, and French and all that. But and it still continues to evolve. So the fact that English continues to evolve is what has made it so big and so strong globally. That's what experts say. I'm sure there are newer explanations because globalization, if you look at globalization, it is driven by English and English is a part of globalization. No, it goes two ways.
Yes, yes. I think somebody has asked about the multi-ethnic, that we are a multi-ethnic country, so I think we addressed that. Then we have, okay, let me see. Oh, so somebody's asked about accents. I think we've already spoken about that because they have said people laugh at people when they mispronounce. It leads to failure of using because of being afraid of society. So I think we addressed that. And okay, so they're asking whether sort of elocution helps for beginners.
Apparently it does. Now, I must admit, my fault. I've been very cynical about elocution because I've grown up with that attitude. My parents would really find it objectionable if I started speaking, suddenly started saying, "Oh, go home," and stuff like that. But elocution is a countrywide industry. Okay, one of the first industries that established itself in Jaffna apparently after the war was the elocution industry, right? And and it is on the flip side, it does promote a kind of some teachers, some elocution, speech and drama teachers, as they're called now, do promote a kind of fake, messed up RP accent, the posh accent associated with British English, and taught its children with it. And I've had lots of students tell me how traumatic that was. Like students who speak perfect English now to tell me I was sent for elocution by my mother and I hated it because the teacher was horrible. She made me say go and home and stuff like that. On the other hand, I've also heard teachers saying, a couple of teachers have told me, that students who don't have access to speaking English, who don't have access to hearing English, when they practice these poems and speeches, I mean, it's rote learning. They are not teaching communication skills. They are not promoting fluency. It actually helps you later when you start speaking. Yeah, it helps your confidence. Yeah, these are interesting areas that need to be researched, I think.
Yes, of course. And also, I think people who study elocution also study literature and poetry. And so, you may not want to go and read a poem generally, but, those doors also will open to you. So I think it's...
Yes.
Somebody wants to speak a little bit about Sri Lankan English during the pandemic. Is there any interesting research that we could read in this regard? Have you come across any?
Not yet, not yet. I'm sure students are writing their dissertations on this topic in many universities. I wrote an article some time ago to the newspapers about language, the impact of the pandemic on not just English in Sri Lanka but on Sinhala as well. But interestingly, I mean there are lots of Sri Lankan usages. Like now you can see British English using quarantine hotels. We used it last September because we had quarantine hotels then, So lots of new language has come out of the pandemic, and a lot of it is, a lot from Sri Lanka as well. But I'm not really well. It's something you can research. It's a living thing. No research as far as I know. Yeah, I haven't.
Okay, so they're talking a lot about stop speaking in, about the resistance and how people are shy of.
Yeah.
Okay. Somebody said that they're enjoying this talk as a language enthusiast and a passionate teacher.
Thank you.
The points that English in Sri Lankan societies be okay. He says, I'm in agreement with the points that were raised in terms of English language education in Sri Lanka. In Sri Lankan societies, we view knowing English to be simply knowing grammar. Hence, we see many who are good at scoring marks for grammar, but struggle when it comes to writing or speaking.
Yeah, that's a problem. Yes, yeah. They're not easy because I must share something from my own teaching experience. When I first started teaching, it was at the University of and I think some of my old farm students are here at this talk, and I think that was one very almost an idyllic situation where we had excellent teachers. Rajiva Vijayasinghe was one of them, and who created this safe space for students to use English, not just speaking but writing, and we never made a fuss about it. Only thing is, we only spoke in English and encouraged them to speak in any way they liked. Okay, but this is not applicable everywhere because as academic university, we had a control over a lot of the background stuff, like the curriculum, the number of hours the students had for English, and the stuff we taught, the approach we took. A lot of teachers working in schools are constrained. They have this X many periods for teaching. There's very little opportunity to increase the contact hours. They don't have a say on the syllabus. Sometimes they don't have a say about how to teach, the methods, the textbooks. They're all prescribed for them. So there is very little the opportunity for teachers in schools to be autonomous and see what the students, their classroom needs, and work accordingly. So I don't have easy answers, sadly. But it's amazing. In spite of this, in spite of all this, there are successful teachers, and I'm really happy. I'm always like very grateful to teachers who have managed to teach their students English in spite of all these odds.
Well, sometimes it's good just to ask the question because then maybe people will think differently. And there's a person who says, how do we, okay, so there's English, which is taught, but there's also the love of language. And one of the things we try to do from the British Council Library is also sort of engender that love of language, sort of draw people in to read, to sort of write poetry, write little précis or appreciations. So it's the whole language part of it as well. So I think they're sort of making a little difference between English, as in grammar and spelling and syntax and pronunciation, and the love of the language. And how do you bring that? How do you bring the love of language to when you are teaching? How do you bring that?
Good question. As you said, I'm a bit of a privileged teacher in this country because the love for English in the students that I get is already established. So there is no big effort on my part. It's the teachers in the schools who have done it. But I think something that has always struck me is like I'm referring to the students who are not in the English department but are learning English in the rest of the university. Something that really triggers their love is literature. Like there have been language courses like proficiency development courses. You throw a poem in, and everybody perks up. Wow! And there's such a sense of achievement and love and excitement when you feel you have understood this poem. So literature always was. We are a very literate country, and we worship literatures of any culture, and we take all literature in high regard. This is something that can be exploited, but on the other hand, big problem is that we tend to take a literary text and kill it in the classroom. the approach to teaching literature has been, explain it word by word, give a note on it, and tell them how hard this is. Learn the metaphors, learn the similes, learn the themes, and learn it by heart. Not to make it into this rich text that has multiple meanings, etc.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And somebody has referred to an article, one of the articles on Corona Kale. What is that?
That's the article I was referring to, Corona Kale. That's a title that the Sunday Times submitted to give my article about the words that came to be used during the pandemic. I wrote this in September, and it's a very much an evolving thing. So now, 5 months later, I'm sure there's a lot more words that we can use. It's very interesting because there was colloquial terms. There were colloquial terms like Corona Kale and Corona Kale, terms like that, as well as extremely official, formal, even military-like terms that were coined, like quarantine centers, and and there's quite a lot of talk about how we were using military metaphors to talk about the government response to corona, like detainees and two corona patients were caught, kind of thing, caught and detained, kind of that kind of language, and then we, like the kind of language we use for internment camps, kind of thing. So that's the ideologies.
Yeah, possibly that was the vocabulary that was readily accessible, maybe to people who have, so maybe they didn't have more synonyms to sort of work with. They say, one person says, I love the Sri Lankanness that is visible in your English usage. Yet, has that particular quality of yours ever been criticized by anyone?
Wow, what a great question.
The question is, so that the Sri Lankanness in your English usage, and has that particular quality of yours ever been criticized by anyone? And if so, what is your answer to such criticism?
Right. Short answer, no. No one has criticized the way I speak. I know my mother doesn't think that I speak very well compared with her, but she never told me to my face. But I'd like to nuance that answer, because I think we don't speak the same way all the time. Like I said, Dinali and I have known each other quite well, and we speak Sri Lankan English to each other. So that's my performance here. That's so our accents are converging. But if she was, a standard British English or American English speaker, the way I speak will be much slightly different. My intonation will change a little bit. I might speak a bit slower. We all talk like trains now in this country. Me particularly, a problem I have as a teacher, I speak too quickly. So thank you for that. I like to be identified as an authentic Sri Lankan English speaker. But no, I have, because I suppose if I'm abroad and making a presentation at some international conference, I will speak slower. My Sri Lankanness will be slightly, I'm not putting on an accent, but I will probably present slow. I do that with lectures as well. If I'm now with Zoom, you don't really, see people's facial expressions, and there's no eye contact properly. You can't speak the same way. But this is a very informal, sorry.
But that is so true what you were saying, because language is so dynamic, and you almost respond. So you are actually responding to to me. So I mean, and as you say, because we've known each other, there is a different level of sort of formality between us. So I suppose that translates into us going into our comfort zone. But you sort of tend to speak differently in different locations.
Yeah, when you're speaking and informally, you speak differently, depending on the audience, depending on the interface, like this mode, online mode, terrible, no choice.
I'm beginning to enjoy English without then is neglecting tense across clauses a characteristic of Sri Lankan English? That is a very academic question. That's for you.
Across clauses, for example, like when you say like a sentence, a compound sentence, like a complex sentence with more than one clause. Tense in clauses is actually a variation we find, I think, even in American English, like a if sentence. If I buy this, will you bring it, kind of thing. But yes, I think we do have that. We can change the first part might be in the present tense, and the second part might be in the past tense, and vice versa. It would be good to have an example, actually, to see. Who is asking this question, if I may ask?
Sorry?
Who is asking the question?
Menaka Chaminda.
Oh, okay, Menaka. I'll have a chat with you after that later.
Then we also have a question from someone says the Sri Lankan word Ayo was introduced into the Oxford English Dictionary. This is one of my favorite questions to you. So what other words have made it into the dictionary since?
Right. Actually, I think Ayo made it to the Oxford English Dictionary from Malaysia or something, because it's not to Sri Lanka. It's not limited to Sri Lanka. I think Chinese people say Ayo, Malaysia. It's very much a part of Chinese, Malaysian English, Singaporean English, etc. But to answer the second part of your question, how many Sri Lankan words have ended up in the Oxford English Dictionary? I think there's about 30 in the big one with the multiple volumes, like the 30 volume thing. But and Richard Boyle, who's studied this, wrote a series of articles about 20 years ago on each of these words. One that sticks to my mind, and one you find in the concise Oxford English Dictionary, or it was there, like when I had my edition about 20 years ago, is kitul. Kitul is there. Then berry is there. Apparently, berry is from a singular term. Apart from tippolanga, they're all singular words. Yeah. And of course, there's a whole load of Tamil words. A lot of Tamil words, yeah.
Okay. All right. So something for our audiences to research. Dinali, it has been wonderful. I think we've gone an hour and I haven't even felt it. Thank you so much for making the time and coming and, and all the technical stuff and all that. We are so appreciative. Thank you from the British Council Library. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Dinali. Thanks a lot for inviting me. And thank you everyone for coming to listen to this and for all the wonderful questions. You can always ask me privately, those of you who know me.
Please contact Dinali privately and ask her. She's also on Facebook, and she's very active on Facebook. And I want to say thank you to our audience. Thank you so very much. You have been very participatory and lots of wonderful comments. I'm sorry I couldn't get to them all. But thank you very much for listening to us and for participating. Thank you to Sajid for really helping out with the tech. We had, today's been a wonderful day. And thank you to the team at the British Council Library. Always wonderful to work with them. And please, everyone, stay safe, stay well. Good night from us. And we hope to see you again next month. Thank you. Good night.